What's up, guys? I'm LQ, and this is the LQ review. And since Picard is out, we've now had 2 episodes of Picard, and Star Trek is kind of a topic people are talking about right now. I thought that I would take the opportunity to rank the Star Trek movies. So there have been 13 Star Trek movies. There have been 6 in the original series, 4 in the Next Generation series, and then 3 in the J.J. Abrams universe. So I'm going to rank them 13 to 1 from least favorite to most favorite. So let's get this ball rolling. But before we get this ball rolling, make sure you subscribe to my channel. I put out a lot of content and want to make sure that you are up to date with everything that I'm doing. So, Number 13. Number 13 is Star Trek The Motion Picture. And this is a movie I want to love. Like, I want to love it. I just watched it the other day and tried. I tried to love it. And I just can't. It's just too slow, too meandering, too Trek jargonish. And it just kind of, it took its cues too much from 2001. And I understand why they did that, because 2001 was relevant at the time. But they still made a boring, meandering, slow, very technical movie. And it was great seeing Kirk back and Bones back and Spock back. It was great seeing where they all were at in the years following the original series ending. It's just too bad that they came back in a movie that just wasn't that interesting. So number 13 is Star Trek The Motion Picture. I want it to be higher. I want to be able to say that it's higher. But every time I watch it, I'm just bored. So that's number 13. Number 12 is Star Trek Nemesis. And that is the 4th movie in the Next Generation, the 10th overall. And this movie had a lot of interesting ideas, and it had a lot of good ideas. I really liked the idea of Shinzon, the idea of Picard being cloned. I really liked the idea of Data making the ultimate sacrifice at the end. Very Spockish, right? I liked the idea of the Romulans having to come to terms with the Federation. The Romulans have been a kind of a mission of Picard throughout most of his career in Starfleet. You look at reunification, we look at Nemesis, we look at what's happening in Picard right now. The Romulans play a big role in Picard's career. So I liked a lot of it. The problem was that it kind of suffered from the time, the era in which it was made. Just kind of cheesy, kind of goofy, and honestly, a lot of it was a little too inside baseball. Like, how do I explain that? A lot of it was fan service. And you're not going to bring in new fans if you're only catering to the old fans. And there's a place for fan service. There is. I'm a big fan of fan service. Obviously, I'm a fanboy, but there's a place for it. And you're not going to expand your fan base if the only people you're talking to are your fans. And Nemesis was guilty of just talking to its fans. Nemesis was also guilty of doing something that several Star Trek movies have done. How can we top Khan? How can we do something better than Khan? What can be our movie's Khan? So they tried to create Shinzon, and they tried to create him... Shinzon to me would have been a much more interesting character if he wanted to be good. If he wanted to reconcile his past demons and be more like Picard. But instead they just had to make him the mustache-twirling bad guy at the end. So for a while there, I was really into Shinzon because it looked like he wanted to be good. But then his true intentions were revealed, and yeah, we just got a silly Star Trek bad guy that could have been a lot more. So, number 12 is Nemesis. Number 11. Number 11 is a Star Trek movie that I always say would have made a very good 2-part episode. Like, it would have been a 2-part episode that would have ranked right up there with the best of the 2-part episodes. And that was Star Trek Insurrection. So, that's the one that has the what is it, the Sorna? The Sauna? The Sorna, right? It's the one where they have to go to the Baku, the Briar Patch, and the Federation wants to relocate 600 or so people off the planet. They're not indigenous to the planet, but they settled on the planet, and it has like a fountain of youth qualities. And the Federation obviously wants to use this fountain of youth quality for the betterment of everybody. But the problem is they've got to get the people off the planet, and that violates the Prime Directive. Picard goes against Federation, leads an insurrection against the Federation, and there you get your movie. This had a lot of fun, silly stuff. You know, the idea of Worf getting a pimple and going through puberty again. You know, the idea of Riker and Troy reigniting their relationship. There's a lot of LaForge getting his sight back. You know, when they were in the Baku region, the Briar Patch, they all started having feelings of being younger, and they felt younger, and they acted younger. And it was fun seeing our older Next Generation cast start to act out those qualities. So it was a funny, very lighthearted adventure. The whole universe wasn't at stake. There's only like 600 people at stake, but excuse me, but it was a very good episode. Not a movie, a very good episode of Star Trek that they made into a movie, and it was fun, and it was fine. So number 11 is Star Trek Insurrection. Number 10 is Star Trek Into Darkness. Speaking of Khan, I understand what they were trying to do with Star Trek Into Darkness, and it would have been better had they just not had Khan in it. It's like they made him. Everybody wants to see Khan, and in this new timeline, we know Khan's still out there, so let's just get ahead of this and address it now. And Khan would have been better for them to bring in later. And I know that with a franchise like this, you know, there might not be a later. So let's do Khan now. I get it. Khan felt rushed. And he felt purposeless. And Khan is such a icon in Star Trek that I don't believe they would have ever been able to bring Khan in and do it right and make the fans happy. They were always going to make fans upset by bringing Khan in. So as far as Khan's concerned, it was a swing and a miss. As far as the movie's concerned, it had a lot of really nice action sequences. Peter Weller, Admiral Marcus, was a great bad guy. The idea of militarizing Starfleet was very interesting. And, you know, kind of felt like they were going to go that route after the events of Star Trek 2009. So a lot of interesting ideas here. Just they weren't able to really bring them all home for me. And I definitely appreciate the idea that Star Trek Into Darkness had those interesting ideas. They just didn't gel for me as well as I had hoped. So Into Darkness is number 10. Number 9, Star Trek Generations. All right. There's some really great stuff in Generations, guys. So Generations is the one where Kirk and Picard meet. And it's the one with the Nexus, the ribbon floating through space. And it's a time ribbon. All that was that was a really cool idea, a really cool concept, and I enjoyed that component of it. Sorna made a really good bad guy. Forget the fact that the last act of this movie was a mess. Sorna made a really good bad guy, and I really understood his motivation, and his rivalry with Picard was very well done. But Kirk, I don't know. Kirk goes out like a punk. I have a hard time sitting through the finale of this movie with the way that Kirk goes out. I have a really hard time with it. Now, there's a book written by William Shatner called The Return, where the Borg end up taking Kirk's body and assimilating it. And that is a fantastic book. So much fun. But Generations was 2/3 of a really good Star Trek movie and 1/3 of a huge letdown. This idea of Kirk and Picard together was this great promise that they just weren't able to deliver. And it really just kind of let me down. So honestly, I'd have rather them told this story without the original crew. I think it would have been better. But here we are. Kirk died like a punk, and that hasn't changed. Unless you take the expanded universe, the novels, and all that into account, that hasn't changed. Kirk went out like a punk. And that's too bad, because he's such an iconic Star Trek character. But let's not forget that Generations also brought us Data's emotion chip. Generations brought us the fantastic Enterprise crash. Such a great scene. The end of the Enterprise D, so good. But overall, Generations was a very mixed bag. So that's number 9. Number 8 is Star Trek 2009, JJ's first attempt at the franchise. And I really like how they tried to pay homage to the original show. In a lot of ways, they tried to pay homage to the original Star Trek show, but through the outfits, through the origin story, there was so much stuff there for fans to get a hold of. And I really like how they also tried to change the timeline. So they didn't necessarily change the original Star Trek. That timeline still exists, but now we have a branch timeline where they can tell new stories in. And I like that and appreciate that as well. But it was still a very mixed bag for me. It was a very mixed bag as far as the characterization of the relationship between Kirk and Spock. The whole Kobayashi Maru thing kind of wasn't so sure about how they handled that. And everything happened really fast. Like right out of the academy, Kirk is now the captain of the flagship Starship Enterprise. I mean, everybody kind of, and I realized that part of the idea of it was that it was destiny for them all to end up together, but it just seemed like it could have never happened had there not been a writer writing it. so I didn't really care for that component of it. So Star Trek 2009 is also a mixed bag for me, but it's my number 8. Number 7. All right, number 7 is usually at the bottom of everybody's list, but for whatever reason, I really like it a lot, and that is Star Trek V, The Final Frontier. Listen, I realize Star Trek V is cheesy. I get it. I get it. Star Trek V is cheesy and silly. But I grew up with those original movies. Those original movies mean something to me. Even the cheesy ones, they all mean something to me because they helped form me. They helped mold me into a Star Trek fan. And Star Trek V was a part of that. And for whatever reason, Spock's brother, Sybok, I really like the character. Now I'm very interested in theology. I teach at a Christian high school, so clearly theology is something I'm interested in. So the idea of this space Jesus, this guy who decided to defect from an emotionless, from a species that had rejected their emotion in favor of logic, to become like this space messiah, that was something that really interested me and was very compelling to me. And then the whole question of, is God out there, and actually, can God be reached through a starship? Is God out there, or is God something a little more unintangible, like something that we can't necessarily reach out and find, something we have to look within? Those were all questions that I thought was very compelling for a Star Trek movie. Really, asking some of those hard questions about theology, about God, and the way they approached it in a very even, balanced manner. I really appreciated it. So, yeah, Star Trek V, I like it. I like it. Yeah, it's cheesy. Yeah, it's silly. Yeah, they end up in a cantina at one point with a bunch of Star Wars characters. Yeah, they end up fighting a giant talking head at the end of the movie. But I liked it. Star Trek V is my number 7. My number 6 is Star Trek III, The Search for Spock. Clearly undoing what happened in part 2. But, everybody talks about the odd movies are bad. The even ones are good, the odd ones are bad. Well, they clearly haven't seen Star Trek III. Star Trek III is a great movie. It's a great movie. The Klingons is the main antagonist. The death of Kirk's son, David, how powerful was that moment? And it was it formed who Kirk was moving on from here. Star Trek 3 formed who he was moving on from here, as far as his viewpoint on Klingons and how much he had to grow from that moment. The sacrifice that he had to make at the end of the movie, crashing the Enterprise, destroying the Enterprise. I'm getting chills right now. Literally, I'm getting chills right now thinking about that moment when they're standing on the planet and they're watching the Enterprise crash, burn up in the atmosphere. And Kirk says, "My God, Bones, what have I done?" And McCoy says, "You did what you had to do." I mean, such a powerful moment. Somebody who's seen the entire original series, watched the movies up to that point, and watching Kirk standing on that planet, realizing that he has just destroyed the Enterprise. He's lost Spock. He's lost his son. Everything that Kirk loses in parts 2 and 3, more than most men should be able to endure, right? Losing your son, losing your best friend, losing what is essentially your home. The Enterprise was his home. And losing all this for the simple idea that maybe he can save his friend. Powerful stuff, guys. Star Trek 3 is a really great movie, and that's my number 6. Number 5 is a movie that more people should have seen. More people should have seen it, and that's Star Trek Beyond, the most recent Star Trek movie. It was such a fun movie. Idris Elba made a really great bad guy, and for once, we weren't tied in the JJ universe. We weren't tied to what had come before. They were willing to tell a new, fresh story that was different, and it was so much fun, and it was very episodic. And he even talks about in the movie how everything's starting to feel a little episodic. And I think that intentionally this one was made to feel a little episodic, like the villain of the week type movie, because it really had the feel of Star Trek. Star Trek Beyond had the feel of Star Trek. Now, it was epic in scope and grand in nature. I mean, they destroy the Enterprise. That's the type of thing that only happens in the movies. But it still felt rather episodic in the way that they approached it. So Star Trek Beyond was a lot of fun, very whimsy, and just a really good Star Trek movie overall. And that's my number 5. Number 4 is Star Trek 4, The Voyage Home, the one with the whales. Also the one that the Enterprise is not in. The Enterprise only makes an appearance at the very end of this movie. This one is, if somebody were to ask me, hey, I'm interested in Star Trek, what's the first movie I should watch? I would not start them with Khan. I would not start them with... This is the one I would start them with, The Voyage Home, because this one will introduce them to Star Trek. It will introduce them to the rules of Star Trek, but it will also do it in a very funny and approachable way that the average person will be able to dip their toe into the Star Trek world and be like, yep, this is for me. Or no, this isn't for me. Because this is a time travel movie where they go back in time into the 80s, and with their... sensibilities of that timeline, of the time that they're from, they have to go there. It's a fish out of water story, essentially. These future astronauts come back to the 80s, and it's a fish out of water story, and it's really funny. It was relevant for the time, and it was a nice conclusion to what is kind of the Khan trilogy, 2, 3, and 4. So yeah, Voyage Home, very funny Star Trek movie. It is the funniest Star Trek movie, and I put it at number 4. Number 3 is Star Trek First Contact, and I love Star Trek First Contact. The Borg is kind of like the Next Generation's version of Khan, right? An episodic villain that appears in the movies, and it's the best movie. The Borg were always extremely interesting to me. The Best of Both Worlds was a fantastic story in The Next Generation. But it didn't end with the Best of Both Worlds. You had the story of Hugh. You had the story of what was it? The war that took place in Voyager that my mind is blank now. But the Borg had a big role in that. There was a lot of Borg stuff that would happen down the line, and the Borg always got more and more interesting to me. They weren't a villain that got watered down. They always got more and more interesting. And First Contact just kind of ratcheted up that interestingness to me, where here's the Borg Queen, very evil, and what happens when she tempts Data with the ability to become more human. Very, very fascinating stuff. First Contact was very much a Star Trek horror movie. In a lot of ways, it reminds me of Alien or Aliens. Obviously, there's not the blood, there's not the gore, there's not the same level of tension, but the approach reminded me of Aliens. Very good movie. Star Trek First Contact. If you haven't seen it, it's another good first place to start if you're interested in Star Trek. I would still say Voyage Home is better, but First Contact is another one that's very, very good. And it's another time travel movie. So, number two is Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country. When people ask me about the great Star Trek movies, Star Trek: The Undiscovered Country is always one of them. Now, not only was it a phenomenal send-off for the original cast, but it was just a great movie. This whole idea of Kirk getting over his biasness, his almost bigoted attitude towards the Klingons, and growing as an individual. That's something that we can all do in our lives. You know, we can all get over our preconceived biases and learn to accept other people, whether it's racial or whether it's political. You know, if you're a liberal, try to see things through conservative eyes. If you're a conservative, try to see things through liberals' eyes. That's something we can all do a little bit better of. And Undiscovered Country had such a beautiful message, but more than anything, it was a beautiful send-off for the original crew. And to some extent, I wish that Generations did not include them, because this was a perfect ending for the original crew. I'll never forget, you know, the end of the movie when Kirk says, second star to the right and straight on till morning. That just fully embodied who Kirk had become over the course of these 6 movies. That Peter Pan quote. And I just loved it. So, yeah, Star Trek The Undiscovered Country has a really special place in my heart because I think it's just a phenomenal movie. And the villains, you know, if you want to talk about a villain that you can compare to Khan, it's the Klingon commander in this movie. What was his name? Korg, I think. Commander Korg. Such a great villain. He was the new Khan because he also had fears about seeing things through the Federation's eyes, about aligning with the Federation. And that was why he did what he did. Such a good movie. So layered. So many layers. So much depth to the movie. I love Undiscovered Country. That's my number 2. But my number 1, I would not be a good Star Trek fan if I did not put this one at number 1, but it really is my favorite, and that's Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. The Wrath of Khan is such an amazing movie. And I recently got the chance to see it on the big screen for the first time at a Fathom event. And oh my gosh, I loved seeing it on the big screen at a Regal theater. Ricardo Montalban just chews scenery as Khan, and there's a certain dread. There's just a certain amount of terror associated with the Khan character. Like, he is evil, and he wants to destroy Kirk, and it's so personal. Like, you can almost hear the disdain coming out of his voice when he talks to Kirk. It's so personal, and the conflict that the two of them have. These two intelligent commanders. You know, I look at the whole the cat and mouse game in the Nebula. That is the battle between Kirk and Spock. It's not a physical battle. I don't think Kirk and Spock share any screen time. Or Kirk and Spock. Kirk and Khan. Scratch everything that I said about Kirk and Spock. Kirk and Khan. In the Nebula, that whole cat and mouse scene in the Nebula between Kirk and Khan, it tells that is what they are, you know? Two people who are after each other. And I don't think Ricardo Montalban and William Shatner have any screen time together in the whole movie. I don't think they meet each other once, but their hatred for each other is so palpable that even without that shared screen time, you can feel it. You can grab it. You know, this isn't a fisticuffs. You know, you don't see Kirk and Khan fighting each other with their hands. They're fighting each other with their minds. That's what I love about Khan, is the cat and mouse game, the battle of wits and battle of wills. And then it ends with Spock's death. What a powerful, powerful moment. Any Star Trek fan will put that amongst their top moments in Star Trek history. Is Spock sacrificing himself. The good of the many outweigh the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the one. Such a powerful moment, and they had to muck it up and into darkness, but that's okay. Such a powerful moment in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. When they're playing Amazing Grace at the end, and they have Spock's funeral, and Kirk is giving his eulogy, and he says, "In all my travels, I've never met anyone so human." And when he catches that in the back of his voice, don't tell me William Shatner can't act, because that dude can act. That was, I'm getting goosebumps again. Talking about that moment. That was so powerful. Spock's eulogy. "In all my travels, I've never met anybody as human." I'm paraphrasing. That's not exactly what the quote is, but so powerful. Such a good movie. Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan is phenomenal. It's a great, not just a great Star Trek movie, it's a great science fiction movie. It's a great movie. So, it's my number one. What is your number one Star Trek movie, or how would you rank all 13 of them? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to hear what you have to say about it. Let's just recap real fast. Number 13 is The Motion Picture. Number 12 is Nemesis. Number 11 is Insurrection. Number 10 is Into Darkness. Number 9 is Generations. Number 8 is Star Trek 2009. Number 7 is The Final Frontier. Number 6 is The Search for Spock. Number 5 is Star Trek Beyond. Number 4 is The Voyage Home. Number 3 is First Contact. Number 2 is The Undiscovered Country. And number 1 is The Wrath of Khan. Again, let me know what Star Trek movies are your favorite in the comments down below. I'd love to hear your take on it. And thank you so much for being here with me at the LQ Review, where we get to talk about all the geeky and all the nerdy stuff we love to talk about. And like I said before, nothing says geeky and nerdy quite as much as Star Trek does. So until next time, we'll see you guys later.